So, Spider-Man Miles Morales has been in a really weird spot in terms of its release. It was considered to be one of the big announcements at the PlayStation 5 reveal event, especially when it was confirmed to be launching alongside the system, but we found out it also was going to be more of a spin-off rather than a full-fledged new game, and then later it was even confirmed that it was going to be coming to the PS4 as well, so it wouldn't be a launch exclusive to the PlayStation 5. So I feel like there's been a bit of confusion as to its place. Is this a system seller game for the PlayStation 5, or just some glorified, overrated DLC? Well, let's talk about it. And since I bought it on the PS5, yes, I finally got my PlayStation 5 system, this video will be focused on the PlayStation 5 version. Before we get into the gameplay, the visuals, all that stuff, let's actually start with the number one absolute best thing about this title. The fact that the story centers around Miles having to keep watch over the city because Peter Parker is on some overseas trip with Mary Jane, which means for most of the game, you don't have to suffer looking at that awful Peter Parker face. I mean, right there, if I gave games an actual review score, I'd give it a couple extra points just for not making me look at that dumb face. But in seriousness, I actually really liked the story in this game. I may be the odd one out. I've seen a lot of people say they thought the story for this was pretty meh. But I may even like the story in this one more than the first. With Peter out of town, Miles is trying to prove that he is capable of protecting the city solo, while everyone, the city's inhabitants, all see him kind of as Spider-Man's sidekick.
Hey, you think you're gonna add that new Spider-Man too?
The kid? Yeah, maybe. Original's just my guy,
Yeah, I know.
And I'll be perfectly honest, the story definitely has a side plot sort of feel. The stakes and the characters don't feel as epic as the original game. I mean, your main villain is the Tinkerer, not exactly a name that strikes fear into the hearts of millions, but I actually kind of like all that. I mean, almost every time superheroes are involved, the whole world is at stake, so I like the variety of having something that's a little smaller scale and more focused. And especially given the situation of Miles, trying to prove himself as more than just the other Spider-Man, I don't think it would make sense to start off his solo career with an adventure that's on the scale of the first game. And yeah, it's a much more intimate story, centering a lot around family and community. While the game map offers up all of New York City, most of the narrative centers around Harlem, where Miles and his mother have recently moved. So yeah, the drama feels more intimate with some pretty cool little twists along the way, and I think it does a good job balancing this idea that this isn't necessarily an origin story, like Miles has had his powers for a while now, but also he's still not the most experienced, and while he wants to be ready for this position, ready to be, on the level of Peter Parker, that's not the reality, at least not at first, and we get to watch him grow and become more sure of himself, a more confident and competent hero. I liked it. Now let's get more into the meat of this game. Visuals, no surprise, this is a stunning game. If you played the original Spider-Man game, you're surely expecting nothing less. The city of New York is about as beautiful as it's been portrayed in any video game ever, and they made a smart move setting it around Christmas time to give the game a unique feel from the first. So now while it feels like you were just Spider-Man in this setting a couple years ago, everything is now covered in snow and Christmas decorations. I'm playing the game again on the PS5 in performance mode, so it's doing sort of like an upscaled 4K at 60 frames per second, a very solid 60 frames per second too. I noticed very few frame drops, and that new SSD makes load times practically non-existent. And those little fine details in this, you guys, especially like on Miles' suit, I found myself multiple times, like after a fight, zooming in to look at all the scuffs and scrapes he had on his suit. And just like the first game, he has some pretty badass looking suits for you to unlock. And the new enemies in this game have a very cyberpunk sort of feel. They're covered in like neon lights and use weapons with a similar glow. It really pops if you have a 4K TV that also has HDR support. I mean, it really feels like Insomniac is just showing off with all the visual effects of this game. You've got all these particle effects the enemies emit with the destructible environments, and things regularly just get pretty chaotic on screen, and surprisingly, the game holds up. That PS5, it's not kidding around. Gameplay-wise, you are looking at an experience very much like the original. In terms of side content outside the story, you go around busting up petty crimes, and you have various obstacle as well as combat challenges. Again, all pretty similar to the stuff you had in the original. The combat feels almost identical, with Miles getting some new tools to make him feel a bit unique from Peter as a playable character, the main addition being his new electronic venom powers, where he can perform these big attacks that emit an electronic pulse to the area. This is also used for the bulk of the puzzle solving in the game, which is honestly pretty lackluster. With this power, most of it involves turning the power back on in different places or repairing a severed electrical connection, like with your web. And the actual puzzle solving mostly just consists of you throwing on your spider sense and following power lines to their endpoint. It honestly feels like it's more there to pad out the game's runtime than anything. There are some parts towards the end where there may be like barriers blocking a connection point, so you have to think a little bit, but they're mostly just busy work. And with how tight and fun the other aspects of this game feel, the puzzle solving really stands out as particularly weak. But yeah, the other stuff, combat, so fast and fluid, feels as good as ever, racking up those combos, reacting to like rockets being launched at you and then swinging them back at your enemies, especially with the addition of the DualSense controller on the PS5 and all its fancy haptic feedback in that. When you're holding the PS5 controller, you get a different vibration, a different feel between you throwing out light attacks and strong attacks. If your opponent blocks your attack, if a grenade goes off nearby, it all feels different on the controller in your hands. That thing is really something else, guys. Like I said, all the visual stuff, like the particle effects and destructible environments, make fights just a visual treat. Granted, sometimes it can be tough to see exactly what's going on with all the chaos, but it's impressive to see that the PS5 takes on all this craziness, again, at a high resolution and high and steady frame rate. There are some stealth sequences sprinkled in there as well. In fact, just like the original game, you have the skill tree, you level up, do upgrades to your gadgets and your abilities, and can kind of spec Miles the way you want them and focus on the type of way you like to play best. And let's not forget my favorite aspect of these new Spider-Man games, something you can't screw up to have a good Spider-Man game in my opinion, the traversal, the web swinging. Just like with many other aspects of the game, it's pretty much the same as the original, but Miles puts his own spin on things with different little flippy moves he does in that, but specifically, again, that Venom power, he can use that for like extra boosts on jumps when he swings. Also on the PS5, that controller adds a bit more immersion during the web swinging as well. You can sort of feel the tension in your web line change from loose on the way down, and you feel the rumble get a little bit heavier as it tightens and swings you back up. But yeah, this is one of the few franchises that I genuinely just like adventuring around and not even trying to do like side quests or find the hidden objects and that stuff. Literally, I just like swinging around. I find it very relaxing. So is this game just a glorified piece of DLC? I think absolutely. But here's the thing, it's a glorified piece of DLC for one of the best games of the last generation. It feels like more of a really great thing, which is fine for me. I do think it's still going to help move PS5 systems as a launch game. Sure, it does feel like a standalone piece of DLC. Sure, it's on the PS4, but many games both now and upcoming are going to be cross-generational, so part of attracting the audience is wanting the best versions of new games, and you're certainly going to get that here with super impressive visuals and the additional DualSense controller features that I think add a fair amount to the experience. I wish these things were easier to describe, similar to the Nintendo Switch's HD Rumble. It's one of those things you kind of got to experience for yourself. And you're not going to find many games that cast a wider net than Spider-Man, no pun intended. These are games that just about anyone and everyone can get into. So I think for most people picking up a PS5, this will be pretty much a no-brainer. And if you play it on PS4, it's still a great game at a reasonable value. Let's not forget that price tag, something I complain about a lot with games. I've got to hand it to them, charging the reduced $50 price for this, even on PS5 where many games are being marked up. You can get it with the remastered version of Spider-Man for $70. But again, $70 is what a lot of people are charging for single games, and Miles Morales on its own is $50, which I think is about the right price. Like I said, it's great content, but it does have that standalone DLC sort of feel. But I do think if they wanted to, they could have charged $60 for it without people putting up too much of a fuss. The game took me about 10 hours to beat without doing a lot of side content, which there are plenty of full-price games that clock in around that playtime or even less. So I do commend them on that at a time where it seems like everyone's trying to price gouge the consumer wherever they can. They priced this title right, and I think that's also going to make it, again, more enticing on the PS5. When you're looking at other games and they're $70, Miles Morales is going to look that much more attractive at $50. So all in all, I think Spider-Man Miles Morales is a solid entry in the series, even if it doesn't build much on the original. It's not like there's much I'd drastically change about the first game anyway, and I think there's enough in there to give Miles a feel that is unique enough so that he stands apart from Peter, which is very much a theme of the game itself. And if you're someone picking up a PS5, you're throwing down $500 for the console. A lot of the games are going to be $70. I think this is a solid pickup, even though it is on the PS4 and that. This is going to be a showcase game for a lot of people. Seeing it run at 4K, 60 frames per second is a treat. It's going to blow people away when you show it to them. Highly recommend people pick this up when they pick up a PS5. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts on Spider-Man Miles Morales in the comments. Are you currently playing the game? Which system are you playing it on? And how do you feel it compares to the original Spider-Man? Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of Spider-Man Miles Morales. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you want to keep the conversation going, hit me up on Twitter at Johnny Zakari. And join my Discord, ChiGuy and Friends. Link to both in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.